virtual green room right now. D.E. Ellis, the author of The Last Monkey is the One Who Drowns, the autobiography of Antonio Manolo de León, as told to D.E. Ellis. And wait till you hear this story if you don't know anything about it already. D.E., thanks so much for coming on.
I'm so glad to be with you.
So let's talk about Antonio and what happened with Antonio. Give us the reason why you wrote this book and more about this man.
Well, I met him years ago when he came to be guest speaker at a church, and I was the non-Spanish speaking musician lady who was playing the piano for the Spanish service when I met him. And, he started telling me some of his story, and I became fascinated. But he really hadn't shared it at all with the world and was kind of shy. And because some of it is so painful, he'd kept a lot of it inside of him. So I did convince him that this was really valuable information for people to know. And so we tried to find somebody to write the book, and I ended up doing it.
Yeah, and you wrote the book. I'm going to jump to the chase so people know. Antonio de León was arrested on the day of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Wow. Yeah. And he was imprisoned in this fort of El Morro, which supposedly was like hell on earth, right?
It was. I mean, it's a really thick stone fort. And so there's no way anybody could get in or out of it. I mean, there is a story in the book of one of the men that just kind of went crazy and said he was breaking out and ran and slammed his head against the stone wall and killed himself in the prison. It was such bad conditions that those kind of things were happening. But yeah, I mean, it was very traumatic. It was a lot of trauma when you're in a concentration camp like that. It's just, I don't know how he was able to get through it, honestly.
Yeah, he escaped execution. He immigrated to the United States. He had to go back to get his family. His boat ran out of fuel. What happened when his boat ran out of fuel in the Atlantic?
Oh, wow. So they had tried to go the day before, and they'd hired a guy that didn't know what he was doing and drove them around in a circle and ended up back at Miami. So they were going to refill their gas tanks, but the Coast Guard saw them and said, well, if you're just going fishing, because that's what they said they were doing, going fishing, and said, if you're just going fishing, you don't need that much fuel. So they took off for Cuba without enough fuel. They did have somebody who got them there, but they didn't have enough fuel. So they ran out of fuel in the Atlantic. And he said that's one of the scariest he's ever been because the waves were just buffeting them up and down, and they were in danger of losing their lives. But a Russian freighter came along and picked them up. And so he got to be with the same yucky potted Russian canned meat that he had to eat in the prison camp. They had it on the boat, too. It brought him back to his whole prison camp experience. And when they got to Cuba, the freighter had attached his boat and towed it there, and the Cuban government impounded it and said, oh, no, you can't have your boat back. This is perfect for our Coast Guard, and you have a choice of staying and going to prison or going back to America.
So he went back to America. So then tell us about his life then. Then he also was a missionary, and he went into the Guatemalan jungles, and there was terrible civil war there, right?
Oh, it was awful. It was really awful. Yeah, so because of his experience in the concentration camp, it really turned him against God and turned him into an atheist because he didn't see how there could be a God with such cruelty in the world. And so for years, he lived rebelling against God, but God never took his eyes off of him. And so in the craziest way possible, he came to know God. You have to read the book to find out. And he came to know God and then became called to be a missionary and went to Guatemala. The first village that they went to really impacted him because some of the rebels had been there and was just devastated by what he saw. So he went back and he was there for quite a while during the Civil War. Finally, the Civil War ended, but I don't know if you know much about that period in Guatemalan history. It was really kind of a genocide. There, a lot of the people that were being killed off were the native Mayan population, because there's a lot of prejudice against the native Mayans and of the various. I mean, there's a lot of different tribes there that come down from the Mayans. I can't pronounce all their names.
Yeah.
The one that we were most involved with was they spoke Quechua, but so he was in a lot of danger there when he was in the jungle. They ran across rebels with guns, and I mean, it was some scary stuff.
Yeah, and so he was a well-liked man, though, when you knew him, right? Like when you met him and didn't know all these stories.
Yes. Everybody that he'd ever ministered to absolutely adores him because he's very loving, and he exhibits those kind of characteristics of what a true Christian is. Somebody who exhibits the love of Christ.
Wow, how interesting, too, as you say, his journey to that as being in that terrible, terrible prison. And today, now, obviously, he's got to be concerned about, when you first met him and after you got to know him, about what's happened in Cuba and what's happening in other places that he's been a big part of.
Oh, yes. He still has family in Cuba, and he keeps in touch with them. And his family's had a really hard time. Well, everybody in Cuba's had a really hard time because there's just not food and medicine. Just on a regular basis, they're hungry because there isn't enough food. And the government has it for the tourist places, but they don't allow it for the people. And so the people of Cuba have been rising up. We haven't heard that much about it here in the United States because we got so many other things we're focusing on. But on July 11th, there was a island-wide revolt against the government, and a lot of people were arrested. And since then, there's been a lot of people trying to revolt against the government, but the government is finding out that they're going to do it and kind of suppressing it. But we're in great hopes that the people of Cuba will be able to gain their freedom, because it's been over 60 years that they've just been oppressed under this government.
60 years, so long. The name of the book, again, The Last Monkey is the One Who Drowns, autobiography of Antonio Manolo de León, as told to D.E. Ellis. You can get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, wherever great books are sold. What do you hope people take away from his story and reading this book?
Well, I think it's a story of hope, because he went through so much. He lost his country, and he was in prison. But he had hope in the end because he came to know the God of the universe. And he was in danger so many times, and God supernaturally protected him in so many ways. And we can read this story and say, wow, God, you are there, and you are concerned about the people, even the people who are rebelling against you and saying, oh, no, there can't be a God. He's still concerned about those people. And so, you can read this and find hope.
I like that. Perfect place to end this. Dee, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate talking to you. Bless you.
All right, so fascinating what Dee's talking about and his story. And as she mentioned, there has been a revolt in Cuba. There has been that happening. July 11th was an incredible day. Thousands of people, I saw some photos of this, thousands of people poured into the streets to protest dictatorship and what's happening and what's happened, as she said, this 60 years. And it's very, very unusual to see any kind of a mass protest in Cuba, any kind of protest for that matter, but because it's dangerous, right? There's people that would get arrested and, of course, the government immediately is looking for these people, and you think of what's happened in so many years. You think of Cubans leaving on rafts or anything that floats, and just to get away, whatever it is to get away. Cuba is in a miserable condition. As she says, there's little food, little medicine, and little hope. So this is a book about hope. All right, on that note, thank you so much for listening to this show. And remember, make it count. Keep the people you love close.